successful man. I'm doing well in my career and I earn an inviolable sum. My reputation's growing and I just know I needed a woman. I mean, society has its expectation of me. You know, being a single doctor at my age without a wife could send so many bizarre messages to the public. I just can't picture myself being lonely. It was at this point that Kelly came into my life. I humorously tell her that she was right on time. Thank goodness Kelly was from a family who was serious about the whole morality thing. They were the direct opposite of my older brother-in-laws who, so far from what I have my sources telling me, have not made any reasonable attempt to reunite her and her husband. Well, Kelly was a consultant at the hospital where I worked. She was a pediatrician. We connected rather quickly and I was excited about the whole thing. I had been too focused on my job to bother about the pleasures of a woman, but with Kelly, I concluded that, well, I had missed out on a lot. Kelly soon began getting cold feet about her relationship. She had told me about her parents and even once as far as introducing me to her sisters, but each time our conversation got to my family, I always found a way to change the subject. I avoided making mention of my parents or even my background. It got so bad that she soon began suspecting that there was something shady about me or my past, which I did not want her to find out. I'm sure her sisters may have thought the same way too. So I discovered that she was gradually keeping her distance from me, and that's when I decided to propose to her. Kelly rejected my proposal and it hurt really bad. I inquired the reason behind her action as I was sure she loved me to bits. She did not deny her feelings for me, but she noted that she felt uneasy with the whole secrecy about my family and background. There were no more evasive cards to play. It was either I told Kelly about my family, or I lost her for good. I went ahead to tell her about my family and the fact that I'm estranged from them. Kelly understood the whole thing though. She was not happy about the fact that I am not at peace with my parents and my brother Eric. I proposed that we could have our wedding without my parents being present. Kelly finally accepted. We both made arrangements about meetings with her parents. The day I met with Kelly's parents, set me on a path I have not intended to thread for the rest of my life. Her parents gave me a warm reception. They weren't interested in my pockets or even my achievements, to be honest with you. They were rather focused on my personal character. After listening to my declared interest in their daughter, they started throwing questions at me, left, right, and center. At first, the questions threw me off course. They asked about my family and background. I talked about my family, though I left out the part where I had to cut them off from my life. Kelly's parents were pleased. They had almost given their consent before asking about when they would meet my parents. Well, I just had to come clean. I told them my family and I don't see eye to eye. You should have seen the reaction of Kelly's parents. Oh my goodness. They reacted as the moralists that they are. They seemed puzzled at the fact that I could be talking about marriage when I was estranged from my own family. Well, that caught me off. They even argued that issues will always come up between spouse and their marriage, and each partner must be willing to forgive each other. If you can't forgive your parents, how can you forgive Kelly when she offends you? Kelly's mother said, I tried explaining the situation to Kelly's parents to make them see my family had hurt me and I was better off without them in my life, but they would not have it. They decided to let me get married to their daughter, if I make up with my family. Their condition did not sit down well with me, but I understood where they were coming from. I would not give out my daughter to someone whom I'm not sure is good enough for her. I've thought about it and I'll try reaching out to my family to see if we could patch things up. And it's not because I miss having them around, far from it. I'm simply doing it because of Kelly. Update number 1. I know I said I was going to reach out to my family and try to patch things up. Well, I reached out to them and well, but we're far from being all right. Going back to my family house required that I brushed every resentments aside, and trust me, it was difficult. On that very day, I rang the doorbell and my older brother, Eric, was the one who opened the door for me. It was on a Saturday, so he was at home. The moment he saw me, he felt ashamed of himself, and if you're well acquainted with my history, you'd know why Eric looked pitiable. Well, besides the whole deaths which he had incurred, I suspected he was emotionally drained with everything going on around him. And I was right. We could not share a hug, and I did not bother pretending like I was happy to see him. I asked if our parents were around, and he simply said, well, he made way for me to walk into the parlor. My dad was reading a newspaper and he was surprised the moment he saw me with the way I appeared. Any parent who would have traded their children for me. My father suddenly just screamed my mother's name twice, and she began coming toward the parlor. She probably felt my father was calling her because my older brother had fallen short again. You bring little to the table which you feed off from, and yet you refuse to help out in the minutest way possible. My mother said as she made her way to the parlor, this is the very same reason why I thought it was a bad idea for my brother to still live in our parents' home after marriage. If he had rented or bought a place for himself after his marriage, he would not have to be around or go through the whole ordeal. Now he's too broke to get a place. That's his business, though he probably knows how I felt all those years. They all teamed up against me. The moment my mother saw me, she rushed and gave me a hug, which I did not ask for. She began talking about how they always knew I would turn out all right in life. The part of her speech that actually got me alarmed is the part where she said they had forgiven me for kicking them out of my induction ceremony. I was instantly irritated, but I did not let it show. It dawned on me that I was not ready to mend my relationship with my parents. I simply feigned as though I received a message in my phone that stated I was urgently needed at the hospital. My parents acted as though they would love to spend time with me. It was not real, but I promised to come back in a few days after meeting my parents for the first time in a long time. I felt discouraged. I didn't want to continue with the whole thing. My family was still the same. The only way that they would have looked like he was having a change of heart was my brother, but that's probably because he'd fallen out of favor with my parents. I made the second attempt to see my parents, and I called them before coming this time around. I was given a king's reception when I got there, but I did not let any of that drama fool me. They were only respecting me because of my status. It was during this second meeting that I informed them about my intended marriage. My mother seemed elated at the prospect of me getting married. She began talking about how they were sure I would not make the wrong choice like my brother who had brought problems to their lives, and the person of a woman. My older brother was tired of my mother trying so hard to make life difficult for him. At every single opportunity that she got, he flared up. He and our mother began exchanging words. It was then I discovered that his wife, Zara, who had run away, had seriously fallen out with my mom. She actually behaved far worse than I heard. My mother accused Eric of being an irresponsible son whom stood by the side and watched his wife physically assault his mother without doing anything. The very Zara, whom my mother had thrown me out for, gave her a slap when the tide of things began changing. My father and I had to stop the whole issue from escalating, and my brother walked out of the house in anger. I somehow felt pity for my brother. My visit that day ended sooner than expected with my parents promising to support me in whatever decision I made. I in turn promised to bring Kelly over one of the days so they could meet with her. I'm willing to act like everything's alright, so Kelly's parents would consent to our marriage, but one thing, it's certain I would cut off from my parents. The moment Kelly is legally, officially declared my wife update, I told Kelly how enthusiastic my parents has seemed and wanted to meet her. Kelly claimed that forgiving my parents was a key piece that was missing in my life for me to be truly happy. I did share her views. I told her my parents had not really changed and they were only acting this way because things had changed for me. Kelly did not agree. She claimed that I was not open-minded because people can change. I didn't bother arguing further. I just let the matter be. What I had decided on the inside was that I would cut them off. Once the marriage happens, Kelly and my parents finally met while we were all having lunch together. My mother began making up stories about how I've always been looking out for folks since I was a kid. Kelly's jaw dropped in surprise. My parents were really different from the stories, which I've told her about them, but the way my mother sang my praise, Kelly almost doubted it. Most of the things I said were even true. I did not join in much of the conversation. I just answered questions when it was asked, and Kelly bonded with them to the point that I almost became jealous. I didn't want her to get used to them because she would obviously not see them again once we were married. My brother Eric walked in on us and he looked frustrated and tired. He did attempt to join us. My parents would not even want him to be there. I marveled on the side of how people can change. I was the one who hated less than a year ago. The meeting got to a close and we were about to take our leave when my parents struck. My mother asked for $2,000 to get some stuff. Wow, I was absolutely disgusted. I just knew the reason my mother had painted me as one looking after others is simply that she wanted something. I wanted to tell my mother no straight to her face without minding the fact that I could avoid all she said about me. But I knew that Kelly would volunteer to do so. I pulled out $1,000 and gave it to her. I said nothing but her request simply attested to the fact that my parents were only concerned well about their image pockets and bellies. As Kelly and I went home, I brought up the issue of what my mother had done. But Kelly insisted that there was nothing wrong with my mother asking for money. They're your parents who should be placed on an allowance. I informed Kelly's parents that all was well between me and my family, and they invited us over. We got to Kelly's family house and my parents put on a show. They were all talking about how proud they were to have me as a son and all of that. Kelly's parents asked about my older brother and my parents, who did not want my brother anywhere close, simply lied that my brother had other commitments. Kelly's parents talked about how happy they were that we had all made up after being estranged from each other for so long. It was then it dawned on my parents that Kelly's parents were already aware of the whole thing. They immediately came up with a cover story that shifted the whole blame to my brother's wife, Zara. They claimed Zara had come into the family and set me against them and fell for her tricks. They, however, noted that if they could go back in time and make things right, they would be more supportive of me. My mother's eyes became teary at this point, and her voice was very shaky. I knew the whole emotional thing was just an act, but Kelly and her parents fell for the whole thing. I listened as Kelly's father immediately comforted them by saying that the present and future were more important than the past. We were all preparing to take our leave when my parents thanked our hosts for a lovely time. My mother did something unexpected. She said that they would have loved to invite Kelly and her family over for dinner at some point, but they were planning on moving out of their house to go rent a place. The statement simply did not make sense. See, Kelly and her parents asked why my parents would move out of their house just to rent a place to live in, and that's when my mother continued her manipulation. She said that the wife of my brother had deceived them into collecting loans to invest in a stock trade that crashed, and now the banks were coming for their house and properties, which they used as collateral. She went further to say that, though she knew I could help if they asked me, they had decided against it as they did not want it to look like they were making things right with me because they needed my help. I was absolutely speechless. Kelly's parents also looked at me as they were expecting me to say something or do something. Well, I knew I could not keep quiet and let my mother play with me. I acted like I was angry, and they had kept the whole thing from me right there in the presence of everyone. I promised that I would meet with my parents later on and find out how to resolve the issue. I saw the look of pride flood Kelly's parents' faces. I told Kelly the next thing that I would not be doing anything because my parents just wanted to manipulate me into settling their debt. I was surprised Kelly even agreed she had seen the manipulation and the whole thing. After I promised to look into the whole debt issue concerning my parents and brother, I knew I had to act fast and prevent my parents' mom especially from pulling any other stunt. I met with them and they began to blame my brother for everything. They claimed that he had deceived them into securing a loan, and even if he had initially stood a chance of repaying the whole thing, then he was currently served the divorce papers by his wife, and so was not in a place where he could spend his time deliberating on loan payments. It was just annoying watching them push the blame on other people when they were, in fact, the creators of the problem. I'm not saying that it's wrong to give your child money to delve into a form of business opportunity, but their desire to spite me caused them to take an irrational decision of using their properties as collateral to acquire a loan for a business that was not 100% certain to succeed. My focus shifted to the fact that their son was going through a hard time and they were busy badmouthing him. I asked if he had attempted to make peace with his estranged wife, and my parents said he had gone to her family house where she stayed with her little boy, but his in-laws had thrown him out. My parents claimed the whole thing served my brother right by putting them into debt that they can't settle. Well, I know my older brother, Eric, had hurt me in the past, but I find myself having pity towards him. And that's why I don't seem to understand why my parents would just abandon him at a time like this. I was still trying to bring myself to understand what kind of parents I have. When the whole thing took an absolute different turn, they started talking about issues beyond the loan. My mother had the gut to tell me about the things which needed to be fixed in the house and all. The entitlement mindset was seriously appalling. What right did they think they had to be making demands on my hard-earned money? The house thing, which I promised to help, was just an empty promise, which I had made to shut my parents up from making any more demands till I got married to Kelly and told them to settle the debt themselves. Well, after listening to my mother make her demand and all, I promised that I was going to attend to every financial issue which they had on their plate. My parents were elated. They began praising and thanking me. They have no idea what would hit them. Once I just get married, I had no idea what I would encounter in a few days. I was at home observing a leave 3 days ago when I was asked to come to the hospital as there was an emergency where a patient was battling for his life. It wasn't the first time that I've been called in for an emergency, so I get to the hospital and while I headed to the ward to have a look at the patient, my nurses briefed me about the situation. It was a male who had attempted to take his own by taking a poisonous substance. The moment I got into the ward, it turned out the patient while he was my brother. It dawned on me at that point in time that despite what my brother's done, I was not ready to watch him die. So I immediately spun into action. Together with my team, we were able to save and stabilize him. I could not find my parents around or anyone whom I knew was close to the family, so I asked about who had brought him there. It turned out to be his friend with whom my brother had been staying at his house for a bit of time. So I listened to his friend tell me about how my brother was frustrated with everything going on in his life. My brother's friend claimed began well talking about how life had lost its meaning ever since he was served those divorce papers by his wife. He came back from work to find my brother foaming from his mouth like a rabid animal. I was broken on the inside. I concluded that my brother had suffered enough. I decided right then and there that though I initially had no plans of settling the debt, which my brother and parents incurred, I would do my best to pay it off just so my brother could have some burden lifted off his shoulders. My brother has been in a coma for the past 2 days, and my parents are yet to ask about his whereabouts. It's clear that they don't care. I'll drop by the house while returning from work to brief them on the latest development of things. Update 1 week later. Hey guys, it's been a week since my older brother, Eric, almost took his and my parents never paid him a visit to the hospital. Once Kelly had insisted she went to him to break the news to them so we could offer them some sort of comfort. They received us in the usual warm manner before telling them about my brother's condition. I asked them if they've heard about him or anything from him. They rightfully noted that it was getting almost 2 weeks since my brother slept at home. They claimed they didn't bother calling him as he was a grown man who could care for himself well. I would not disagree with them about my brother being a grown man who could care of himself. I would rightfully judge them to be self-centered and irresponsible for not calling to check up on him at all. Here was your son who had been living with you and you suddenly stopped hearing from him. Any responsible person would call to know if their housemate had moved out or was involved in some kind of misfortune. So I break the news to them that their son, who quote could take care of himself, had almost lost his life. My parents reacted as though they were touched, and Kelly and I thought that they meant well. But what is the use of putting up a show when they never stepped foot inside the hospital? Once I had the most emotional time of my life yesterday. See, my brother, well, he got out of the coma. I was informed about it and I went to see how my patient was doing. My brother was surprised when I walked into his ward. I didn't act with any form of resentment. I conversed with him like I would any other patient. I wanted the whole thing to be briefed as he needed to rest, but he called my name the moment I turned to leave. He didn't say anything. He just starts to cry. I gently lay my hand on his shoulder and tried making him stop. But he just couldn't. He said sorry for everything. You could see the sincerity in his voice, and I broke into tears myself. I can't really say how it happened. It was really emotional and it took a few minutes for me to pull myself together. I told him everything would be alright before letting him rest. I told Kelly what happened and she was really happy that I was at peace with my older brother. I equally informed her that I would try settling on a monthly basis, the dads, which Eric and my parents had incurred. I was doing this because of Eric and not for my parents. I've called my parents and we would be going to the bank soon. So I came to an official arrangement with them. I feel a certain kind of peace on the inside ever since making up with my older brother. But though we are okay now, I doubt my parents and I would ever get to the point where Eric and I are. What made me forgive my older brother was the fact that he was remorseful about what he's done. But my parents are not broken. They're still moving about with a sense of entitlement, and I don't see myself forgiving them without them being truly sorry for their past mistakes. Final updates posted by Opus. So my brother Eric, he's been discharged from the hospital and I covered the cost of everything. I didn't want my brother to go back to the family house as I knew my parents would make things difficult. I brought him to stay with me till he was fully recovered, after which I would rent him a nice apartment. He was bothered about the bill and expenses till I told him I've covered the hospital expense and I'd be paying off the loan. He had secured my brother. He was very grateful. We both began bonding while he stayed at my place. It was during this time of our lives that I understood why people said the family was a blessing. I enjoyed the fact that I could actually have someone I called family. The next thing was his upcoming divorce from his wife, Zara. My brother Eric wanted to be actively involved in his son's life and he feared he might not get that chance if the divorce finally takes place. He attempted to seek my help in making up with his wife, but I made him see that he was better off without her. The day of the divorce finally came and my brother was in court. I was there with Kelly to support my brother, and it was the first time I was setting my eyes on her ever since she had my parents throw me out. Zara was there with her parents too. She had argued that my brother was not able to care of her and the child as he was neck deep in deep depth. The judge dissolved the union and Zara was granted custody of the child, though Eric was allowed to see his kid periodically. Eric broke down in tears, but his tears could do nothing. 2 weeks after the divorce taken place, I rented him a well-furnished apartment and he continued his job at the bank. He was basically starting life afresh, but I'll tell you the truth, it was for the best. We never saw or heard from my parents throughout Eric's divorce. Once the divorce was finalized, the wedding preparation of Kelly and I began taking place. That's when my parents decided to show up. They wanted to put on a show at the event, and they expected me to foot the cost of the expensive dresses that they'd wear. I did it as the last thing that I would do for them. Well, the wedding day finally came, and guess who was my best man? You guessed it, Eric. He made a speech during the reception that almost moved me to tears. He talked about how he had failed me as a senior brother, but I still stood up for him even when there was no reason for me to do so. He left out the details though because he did not want people to know. My parents were two-faced. Not on my wedding day. At least the ceremony came to an end and I could finally push my parents out of my life for good. Kelly and I embarked on a 1-week honeymoon vacation, and my parents visited us the moment we returned. They actually suggested that we both come and spend some time at home. The suggestion took my mind to what had transpired when Eric had gotten married. I turned it down with the claim that we needed to settle down. My mother soon indicated her interest to visit us. There's no way in this world that I would let her know where I stay, much less come and visit. We just ignored her and she just kept on bugging us. I don't know how she managed to get the address of my home, but I was shocked when Kelly and I returned from work on Friday only to find my parents sitting comfortably in the visitors' lounge. The funny part of it is they had bags. They actually came to spend some time with Kelly and me, even if my relationship with them was good, and I held no resentment towards them. It was just plain stupid to want to spend days in the home of your child who recently gets married. Rather than responding to our greetings, they began talking about how nice my place was. I asked what they were doing, and Mother said that they came to spend just a few days with me. I immediately called my security guard and reprimanded him for letting my parents in. I warned against repetition. I had him throw my parents out, but this time around I informed them that I would be obtaining a restraining order against them. I made them understand that the last money they got from me, well, it was the last they would ever get. They looked towards Kelly to see if she could mediate on her behalf, but her look showed. She was fully in support of what I was saying. They left and the sweet part is they don't have either of their children on their side.